My initial views on immigration were heavily influenced by my family and the media. Being in Wisconsin, we don't see immigration issues up close, so the way that it's portrayed up here is definitely different from the actual day-to-day issues seen in the border states. One of our first journal entries that we had to write for this class was to discuss our initial thoughts on immigration, and that was something new to me because I never really thought about immigration that closely before. I quickly learned that there were many complexities to it, such as overall quality of life, economics, and overall sustainability, and that's what causes people to want to immigrate in the first place. I figured that as long as immigration doesn't hurt our sustainability as a country, then there's no reason not to have it. However, it did leave me wondering how we would handle the increase in population when it came to schooling and jobs. One of the more biased viewpoints that I had written down was that as long as the immigrants contribute to U.S. taxes, then there's no reason to turn them away. That was a bold statement shaped by my previous understanding of immigration and what is said in the media, and that was one of the most eye-opening things from this trip in terms of the reality of immigration versus what the media says. Borderlinks provided us with countless opportunities to learn about immigration from the day that we arrived to the day that we left, and unfortunately it's kind of hard to put all those experiences to light in a video. Our immersion began with lectures from Lupe Castillo on the history of the border and immigration, and with author Todd Miller on the border issues in terms of money spent on prevention tactics, which end up totaling to about $18 billion. One of the first things that Lupe brought up was that we shouldn't say illegal immigrants, but we should actually be saying undocumented migrants. This brought some controversy to our group, mainly because the term illegal immigrant isn't seen as derogatory back here in Wisconsin. Another interesting fact was that the wall is more for show than anything. The U.S. has a sort of one-sided philosophy for the wall, where it's open for capital but not bringing in workers. In other words, we're open if it brings us profits, but not if it makes us lose jobs. One such example of this is the pedestrian bridge in California that was actually built over the wall on the border, and it allows U.S. citizens to enter the airport in Tijuana to get cheaper rates to fly. I enjoyed the next few days much more because we actually began to see more concrete examples of immigration. Our second day started by going to one of Arizona's border towns, Arivaca. It's there that we learned about the funnel effect of prevention by deterrence, which is basically a plan to use the desert as a natural way to deter people from crossing the border. This is a huge issue because it lacks the resources in the desert that actually makes the desert walks very treacherous for the migrants. As a result of this, there's been several humanitarian groups formed, such as People Helping People, No More Deaths, and the Green Valley Samaritans, all in the efforts to help bring aid to the migrants by providing things such as water, food, clothing, and other necessities such as medical attention. We also learned in Arivaca about how Border Patrol checkpoints not only bring inconvenience to the residents or to the migrants, but it also brings inconvenience to the residents by subjecting them to questions and searches almost on a daily basis. After our visit to Arivaca, we went down to Nogales, Arizona to look at the actual wall of the border. It was upsetting to see the natural beauty that the wall destroys. The wall in reality is just a tall metal fence, and you can see through it to Mexico, almost making Mexico look like a zoo exhibit. It's sad and unnatural, and it illustrates a lack of willingness from the U.S. to make amends with Mexico. This is obvious by seeing how the Mexico side literally has houses up against the fence, whereas the U.S. side just has a military zone. The last activity of the day was a desert walk. This was more emotional to me because it really was a strike of reality. The desert's filled with a bunch of thorn bushes and cacti that make it tough to walk a straight line. The reality set in though when we'd approached some crosses that were placed out in the desert in memory of the immigrants who had actually died on the path while we were walking, and their clothing and personal items were left behind, and it just really brought the situation to light. The last couple things I want to mention are Operation Streamline and our meeting with Dario Andrade. In short, Operation Streamline is a court system designed to process up to about 70 undocumented migrants per day. Each migrant gets appointed a private attorney at about $125 an hour, who basically stands next to their client while they plead guilty. In the end, the total cost for the state to pay the attorney fees easily comes to about $50,000 a week, which is just... Finally, Dario. Dario is a young man who's lived in the U.S. for about 11 years now, and he's also an undocumented migrant. Dario did enter the country legally with a tourist visa, but stayed illegally beyond the terms of the visa. His family got established in the U.S. and lived in an uncomfortable one-bedroom apartment. Now, at only 21 years old, Dario has had to suffer through the separation and deportation of his brother, the near deportation of his mother, and the struggle of trying to establish a higher education for the future, while having to worry about which member of his family may be facing customs tomorrow. That was probably the toughest thing for me because I could never imagine being forced from my homeland or being forcefully separated from my family and having to risk everything that I have to get them back. Before coming to Carroll, I didn't really have a definition as to what culture is, and if I was asked, I'd probably say it's the way we live our lives. But after having our cross-cultural seminar and cross-cultural experiences, I learned that there's definitely more to it than just the way we live our lives. Culture is made up of our beliefs, values, knowledge, and means of stability. And thanks to the variance in all of our beliefs and values, it really does help create diversity in the world, which is what makes it such a wonderful place. It's the reason that we continue to be intrigued and continue to learn and experience new things from each other. I'd say our sense of culture comes on us from a young age, starting with the way that we're raised. We learn the values and beliefs of our families and of our communities, often spanning back several generations. I think the community aspect is important to note, though, because cultural differences definitely vary demographically. Our class learned about this when we used a tool on the Gerd Hofstede website that depicts the cultural differences between countries. As an example, we looked at the US and Mexico, where there's only two similarities, which are masculinity and long-term obedience, which basically means that both countries are driven by competition and achievement, and we also value tradition. Where we differ from Mexico is the fact that Mexico has a large power distance in terms of government, and there's much less individualism. There's also a high rate of uncertainty in Mexico, which is where change isn't welcome and there's a lack of trust in political figures. So I guess from those, if I had to give a solid definition of culture, I'd say it's the way we live our lives in terms of the beliefs and values of the people around us, while also considering what we must do in order to live a stable and fulfilling life. Borderlinks helped back my understanding of culture when it came to talking about family, demographics, and stability. I mentioned before about how all of these points really do shape culture, and our experiences with Borderlinks helped show that. The truth is, people don't migrate to the US because it's a simple solution. In fact, I'd say it's a tough choice because, as we learned with some of the experiences down there, like the desert walks, separating from your family, and legality issues, it really is tough. Migrants come to the US to reunite with their families and to regain stability in their lives. With the structure in Mexico, it's hard to live day by day when you're only making a few dollars a week, whereas in the US, migrants can make a few dollars an hour. What many of us fail to understand is that the migrants don't come to the US to change our ways of living or to take advantage of what the US has to offer. They come to the US to gain stability and to keep their families and the Mexican culture alive. If we didn't do whatever it takes to survive, there'd be no reason to pass our culture on to future generations. Culture is always going to be an important thing in our lives, and personally I think there's a few things that this experience has helped me to appreciate. The first one is we need to bring change to the immigration issues in the US. I'm not saying that we should open the gates and allow people from all over the world to just flock into the US. I'm saying the process involved in immigration needs to be revamped to give people more immediate feedback. I mean, residency papers are still being processed from 1995, and if it takes that long, if it takes 20 years to gain citizenship, who wouldn't enter the country legally? Aside from immigration, I learned that culture and the existence of it really does help each and every one of us to learn and grow from each other. I can add to this on a personal level as well because my future career is involved in computer science and software development. In this field, you learn by doing and you learn by discussion. It's unique because there's also many computer languages that are used, but the context of each language stays the same, whether it's used by a developer whose primary spoken language is English, or by one who primarily speaks Spanish or Hindi or Chinese. And from that, I learned that it's important to realize that by learning new ways to communicate or operate, we continue to become smarter and grow stronger as a whole. It's important because learning to get along and accept each other's differences makes the world a more enjoyable and happier place. And the experience with this class in Borderlinks has definitely helped me to appreciate that. This Borderlinks experience was definitely unique, and I don't regret signing up for it one bit. I think outside of the immigration issue, what made it even more unique was the fact that when we all signed up for the class, we didn't know what to expect, and none of us really knew each other either, which it was kind of interesting to see how we went from day one where our class is meeting every other week for an hour to actually going on the 5-day immersion where nobody knew each other, and by the end we were all friends, and kind of seeing the bonds that grew from that just really made the trip and the experience that much more enjoyable.